Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Chip Dunn to the show. Chip is the founder and CEO of Monomyth Group, a firm he launched in 2017 to rethink how capital supports businesses from startup to scale up. With over 2 decades on Wall Street, he's now channeling that expertise into the future of energy as chairman of Anovion Technologies, a company at the forefront of North America's battery materials revolution. From trade and manufacturing to electric batteries and beyond, Chip's here to share his outlook on where these industries are headed and how Anovion is shaping the supply chain for a cleaner, electrified world. The content here is for informational purposes only, should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investors or potential investors in any featured fund or deals on this video.
Fantastic. Welcome back to today's episode of Resilient Alpha. I'm Marty Sakata. Today we have Chip Dunn on the show. Chip is the founder and CEO of Monomyth Group, a firm he launched in 2017 to rethink how capital supports businesses from startup to scale up. With over 2 decades on Wall Street, he's now channeling that expertise into the future of energy as chairman of Anovion Technologies, a company at the forefront of North America's battery materials revolution. From trade and manufacturing to electric batteries and beyond, Chip's here to share his outlook on where these industries are headed and how Anovion is shaping the supply chain for a cleaner, electrified world. Chip, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here.
Great. So we're going to jump into, we'll have a 30-minute discussion and then a lightning round to go through how things are going in a faster way. So Chip, you founded Monomyth Group in 2017 with a unique concept of monomyth capital. Capital that supports a business throughout its entire journey. How does this philosophy shape your outlook on industries like manufacturing and trade, especially in the context of emerging technologies like electric batteries?
Well, Marty, thank you for this. And, at Monomyth Capital, as I think about the type of capital that we're deploying and investing out of Monomyth Group, Monmouth Capital is really about, as you mentioned, thinking about all the different types of capital a business might need throughout its entire business journey. And that, because what I saw many years ago doing private equity was that, businesses evolve or transition from one type of capital to the next. It could be various series, or starting with seed or angels, through various series of venture capital, and then into growth capital out of equity, private equity firms, and ultimately into private equity, buyout capital, or public markets, or strategic capital. And so, unless a business has been incubated in a big strategic, industrial business or consumer business or other type of business, it just is harder for that business to kind of get the kind of capital it needs at those various points in time. Especially to your point or a question around production-based businesses or manufacturing businesses. When you think about America 100 or 150 years ago, the type of capital that was being deployed was out of course, the big institutions like J.P. Morgan, but also out of families, and founders like Andrew Carnegie or John Rockefeller or whatever it might be.
Of course, yep.
And so that's where I think we've kind of developed this idea that shorter term capital isn't really helpful in many cases especially for a capital intensive business, which most manufacturing businesses tend to be. And so having the ability to think beyond that 3 to 5 year window where most of your LPs of private equity or venture capital are looking for liquidity events, we by design are to create it so you can actually go beyond the normal. And actually, it doesn't mean we can't complement venture capital and private equity along the way. In fact, in many cases we do. It's just that the business itself, needs to have various types of capital available to it. And that might mean equity, it might mean mezz at some point, it might mean debt, or everything in between.
I mean, a great example is that less than 1% of companies are funded by venture capital, and less than 10% of those succeed, right? So I think what you're talking about is more of a continuum of like an investment approach.
That's exactly right. And you think about the origins of venture capital to help build out, early stage, take the early stage risk, and as venture has really evolved or gotten more stratified across these various buckets. We all know we have funds that literally focus only on seed rounds, or only on A's, or only on B's and C's, or whatever it might be.
Who make sense of that? Sure.
Which of course makes sense for the venture capital firm and for the LPs of that venture capital firm to get liquidity potentially at those various nodes of transitioning from one type of capital to the next. But the company itself, especially the management team, to make long-term business decisions, need some amount of comfort that the capital that they might need for the decisions they're making today that might affect 10 years from now is going to be there.
Right. Yeah. It's a interesting time. Can you maybe give a little bit more background on what you've done in private equity before Monomyth and
Sure.
where you're coming from?
Yeah, happy to. So I spent the first 15 years of my career on traditional Wall Street investment banking. Ultimately, was at Goldman Sachs in Chicago, working with a wonderful banker named Byron Trott in Chicago, and we were working. He has a specialty, or did at the time at Goldman, really working predominantly with the big families around the country in privately held businesses. And so when he left after the great financial crisis, a number of us found our way to BDT Capital, which is now part of a bigger organization that merged with Michael Dell's family office, or the old MSD Capital, I should say. But over the course of that kind of 8 years post great financial crisis, and the time that we built up BDT, I stayed at BDT until 2017, and really, so families, as you know, and many of your listeners will know, they might have a core business still, especially in the United States or and in Europe, but in many cases they might have diversified by now, and so many of us, at times, in the early days, all of us were generalists. So we did, and we had a $2 billion fund that we were investing from the beginning, with all our LPs being families. So and the LP GP structure, although I think refined under under BDT, because the funds were 14 to 16 year funds. So unlike the traditional 10-year fund, we could take a longer term view. But what we found is that the competition, certainly, but even us, started migrating less towards the 10-year underwriting and more to the 5 to 7. Let alone our competition was now underwriting the 3 to 5. And so it just was, at a point, when I finally left, it was for no big reason other than I really felt that the families that we were working with had something that was really strong in a diversified, potentially at least, in a diversified holding company structure. Many of them weren't necessarily taking advantage of that, but many of them were, and some were starting to develop, direct investment platforms. Many were not, and so I saw an opportunity to really start developing something that was more aligned, even more aligned with family offices, or what I thought at the time, because they have a much longer holding period. So I initially started Monomyth Group, with my own capital, and then started bringing in some outside capital in 2021 when I started developing a carve-out strategy, which Anovion Technologies is really the product of.
Right, interesting. I think what a lot of people in the United States in particular miss is that many family offices outside the United States own conglomerates, right? And so they have varied interest in many things. And a lot of times those conglomerates are the biggest companies in those countries.
Yeah, you think about a country like Sweden, many of the largest businesses are actually diversified holding companies that have been owned by the same families or discrete families for generations.
Wow.
You have every country has their story like we were talking about. But at the core of it, and especially when you think about on the manufacturing side, you have a number of families, whether it be in Germany or Italy or in the Nordics, that have a long history of developing more of a diversified structure, at least as related to the family capital outside of the core business. And then when the core business may have gone through a transaction, then either in some cases the family might unwind part of that, and each family would be in silos, or in many cases, just like in the U.S., that big liquidity event might go into a more centralized family office, and then be invested, as either a diversified holding company or some. I'm thinking about like the Jacobs family in Switzerland in particular, that have developed a much more of a private equity approach.
Right. And so what you do is you have a whole co function, and then at the same time you're able to have subsidiaries which people can invest in directly or co-invest
Correct.
in.
Yeah. So the original idea was actually to bring in capital at the holding company level. But what I found, even though I wasn't charging fees when I first started bringing outside capital in 2021, even though I wasn't charging fees, which I thought was a differentiator, because I felt that if I had my own capital at work, every dollar I brought in would be a force multiplier. So why charge fees if I didn't have to build out a big team and have pretty office space in New York City or whatever it might be. And so I really felt that that finding a differentiator was important. However, what I found after that first initial raise of outside capital, especially as the family office asset class writ large developed more of their own direct capabilities, having brought on teams that might have private equity backgrounds, a lot fewer of those families really were interested in more of a blind pool. And so that's why when I started this carve-out transaction, carve-out strategy, it allowed me to really start thinking differently about the way I was raising capital for the discrete deals, because I can create a subsidiary where I could either have a controlling stake or minority stake alongside families that wanted to have, not necessarily just families, but capital that might want to have just direct exposure to that specific asset.
Very innovative. Yeah, sure. So I mean, obviously things are changing dramatically from day to day, and there's all kinds of tensions over supply chain and critical materials like graphite and lithium. You have a Wall Street background. You've been a key player in battery supply chain. What's your take on trade policies and how they influence domestic manufacturing in the USA, particularly for electric batteries?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is obviously a much more complicated answer to a very, very complicated question. And especially in light of what's been going on over the last 2 or 3 months, and some of the especially last week with the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs. But when I think about a lot of what's happening under the Trump administration, it really, to be completely selfish, really benefits certainly Anovion and what we're doing there, but across the entire battery technology landscape in America, and to a large degree as well, the entire energy transition. So the irony that I see is that although no one wants to talk about necessarily clean tech anymore, or climate tech, or environmental, or all of this, or the Green New Deal in the same way, a lot of the same things that are happening today, although they're happening in a very different way, will ultimately benefit the same parts of the things that at least I found as part of the legislation that was passed over the last 3 or 4 years to be the most important parts of what I consider the next 100 years of American industrial and energy policy. And so, especially when I think about the tariffs, although we can all complain about or challenge some of the decisions, what fundamentally, if you think about the use of a tariff, if you're trying to support an industry that never has a chance of competing with the people that are coming in, that are currently importing to or exporting to the United States, like China, then tariffs are probably a bad use of policy or a bad economic weapon. However, when you think about, you have to ask yourself a question: if the energy transition writ large is really important to America, and we don't have the capacity today to support a lot of the things that we all are really focused on, I'm sure a lot of your investors are invested heavily in things like crypto or AI or data centers, and we all know, we read every day about how much energy usage that all is, and it's putting so much strain already on the power capacity in America. The only real technology that's available immediately are batteries at least to help support or complement the existing grid and projects, to actually at least bridge us to the days when more nuclear sites can come online, or more solar projects can be developed, or small modular nuclear can be deployed more aggressively. All these things are going to take a lot of time, and so batteries are the only thing that can actually more immediately affect that. And the problem is, and this is where the real, thing that I think a lot of people on the outside want to criticize the administration about, but the administration is getting absolutely right, is the fact that Today, if we were to actually deploy a bunch of battery, energy storage systems onto our grid, the most critical infrastructure that we probably have in America, other than maybe the interstates highway system and our rail system. But if we were to deploy energy storage systems at scale, the only choices we have today are batteries that are made in China with Chinese stuff inside, or maybe they're Japanese or Korean batteries with Chinese stuff inside. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at some of the stuff that's happened over the last 6 months. Think about the Hezbollah operation in the Middle East, in the Middle East 6 months ago, to where you can actually manipulate technology today and the stuff that's inside the technology to for statecraft or spycraft. And so we really want
You're talking about exploding pagers.
Exactly.
Right. So do we want exploding batteries?
Yeah, I'm trying to dance it a little bit carefully, so I don't have any proof that this is possible. But everyone I talk to suggests that what I'm about to say is possible. If the average soldier in the military has 5 or 7 battery kits, battery packs on his or her kit today, everything from night vision goggles to the PDAs that they use, etc. The only choice we have today as America that are clearly about national defense, national security, are Chinese batteries with Chinese stuff inside, or Korean or Japanese batteries, which are allies, of course, but with Chinese stuff inside. So if we're going to have battery technology writ large developing in America, you must have some bit of the supply chain come from America. You don't have to necessarily have 100%, but we learned in COVID at least that the reliant supply chain on at least critical needs for American usage, for especially national security usage, we have to at least have a minimal amount of that supply chain come domestically if we can. And in this case, we have the resources. The irony in our entire business model, which I didn't appreciate the day we were looking at it, the irony is that the feedstock, the raw material, comes from essentially what is some would call waste product coming out of the refinery process, the oil refinery process. And so here we are. If China has a 97% market share globally on the manufacture or production of synthetic graphite for battery purposes, that quality of graphite doesn't take a leap of faith to think that if America is developing the feedstock, or in some cases England, that means the Western economies are feeding the Chinese economy with the cheapest part of the supply of that battery supply chain, and then we're all purchasing back at wholesale in the form of batteries, whether it be an electric vehicle or it might be
fascinating,
whatever. So this is the part that just gets my blood boiling, and I wasn't necessarily a China hawk or an environmentalist before this all got going. I've sort of evolved into some of those characteristics because of what I've seen happen, and wholly selfishly, because I have a lot of my own net worth, plowed into this business.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a strategic rationale. I think that there's like a institute, maybe it's out of Australia, that said that there's 42 strategic technologies, and that 20 years ago China dominated 5 of them, and today it dominates 35 of them, and the United States is number 2 or below, and the U.S. only leads in 5 of them.
And guess where the technology came from to make our production possible? It came from America,
right?
And the Chinese, developed it further and improved upon it. Give them full props for that. But now they dominate the world market.
And in some cases, China isn't just number 1 in manufacturing a certain type of technology. They're number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, indeed. Look, if you mentioned lithium and certainly graphite, I mean, you're talking. If you look at any of these lists that are coming out over the last several weeks and months, whether it be lithium or cobalt. Not less cobalt for sourcing, but certainly production. Synthetic graphite, natural graphite. Synthetic graphite, 97%. Natural graphite, 70%. Lithium, I think they have 65 or 70% of the production capabilities. I mean, and it goes up and down the list of all the key minerals. Of course, a lot of the attention goes to the rare earths because there's broader application for things like magnets and what have you. But if again, I have to ask the question: if batteries are part of the long-term energy transition, especially when I think about the real transition node that we're at today, that we have to have some bit of the supply chain in America.
We had a DARPA presentation. A guy got $80 million to create a pharmacy in a box, and it's because to develop off-patent drugs. And it's because every off-patent drug in the United States goes through China for development, either through base elements, packaging, or manufacturing, right? So people are trying to become independent of it because China, if they wish to, could just stop any drug from being produced that people use for diabetes or high blood pressure, et cetera. So it's an interesting world that we're in today. So manufacturing. So Anovion Technologies is positioning itself as a leader in North American battery materials manufacturing. What do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for scaling up U.S.-based manufacturing in this sector, especially given the reliance on energy-intensive processes like synthetic graphite production?
Yeah, and this is also, I think, where the government, has played and is playing, I think, a really important role. Because again, when you think about something really basic, when you think about investing in a SaaS business startup out of Silicon Valley, and you put seed capital or A round capital in, and the business can grow in
It's a
12,
hockey stick.
18,
It's
36 months.
less than 5 years.
It takes 2 years. And it used to take, in many states, years to get a permit. That's changing, thankfully. But getting the capital, it's hard to start building $1 billion facility like we have to build down in Georgia, and try to have that $1 billion essentially up front when we won't have cash flow for at least 2 years to get there.
So how do you get the capital? How do you get capital to build $1 billion facility in Georgia?
So that's been that by far. So we as we built out our business model back when I first carved out this initial sort of set of assets from an industrial company in Chicago. We did not want to take on unnecessary risk because we're going to have massive execution and scale up risk. And so we actually chose the technology that was invented in America, but now virtually all of the capacity in China runs. And so it's already proven technology. And so all we're doing is reshoring a lot the most that technology.
Sure. Yep.
We're repatriating really. But it doesn't change the fact that we're still early stage risk, capital intensive, which means that finding equity investors who can underwrite 3, 5, who are used to underwriting the 3 to 5 year holding periods, find it much more challenging to underwrite the 5 to 10 or longer periods.
Yeah, exactly right.
And so
they've lost that sort of capability or worldview.
I mean, listen, when Charlie Munger say, "Show me the incentives, I'll show you the management's actions." Private equity and venture capital are no different. I mean, of course, if they have a carry model, or even an AUM focused model, but certainly a carry model, they don't get paid unless they demonstrate return, which means they have to exit an investment.
Do you ever use like non-dilutive capital, like grant money? Or
yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of ultimately, even your last question kind of would get us there eventually. The government has been playing a role, and I think will play a very big role, or can. I think but at the end of the day, even if we can secure 75-80% of the debt capital from various programs out of the government, which I think is very doable, it still means that we have to have 20 to 25% of the capital come from equity investors, and that's where that's been the challenge, and so we've been really focusing our business around getting through technical qualification with the OEMs, so that we can actually get commercial contracts in place as buttoned up as they possibly can be to bring our cost of capital down as low as it can.
Sure.
Because otherwise, if I tried to raise $250 million of equity capital 2 or 3 years ago, which I certainly tried, but it would have been probably a pyrrhic victory if I had gotten it, because it would have been really, really expensive. And so that's where we are today. Is that now as we're now on the precipice of getting commercial agreements, hopefully we can de-risk that equity story to actually attract much lower cost of capital with people that might very well be able to look at kind of 5-year plus kind of investment horizons.
So I imagine with like a lot of energy intensive processes, most of China's technology comes from coal and other types of not clean energy, right?
Yeah. So this is one of the big advantages, and this is what I was getting at before. I'm going down to an event this week down at Duke University, and it's certainly sponsored by a group that would have otherwise loved the IRA and the infrastructure bill and a lot of the Biden policies. And that's all fine and good. But what part of the message is, they can still win, the outcome, the long term, because, and I'll answer your question this way: China's one of our greatest advantages at Anovion versus the Chinese, and why I'm confident we can compete with them long term once we're in business, which is what the tariff will help us do, is they can get in business. But we think we can have an upwards of 20% cost advantage over the Chinese, whether it be transport, logistics, and production costs, ironically, some labor costs. But our second biggest cog is power. And so the cheaper the power, the more profitable our business is. And in the United States, the cheaper the power, the cheaper power tends to be nuclear or renewables. And of course, that's clean, which means that our CO2 footprint is substantially lower than the Chinese. The Chinese will varies depending on some of their production process, but generally speaking, they might be as high as 24 kilograms of CO2 for every kilogram of powder they produce. Ours can be between 4 and 8.
Wow.
So you're talking upwards of an 80% reduction in CO2 footprint, which is great for the conversation I'm going to be having later this week, on the one hand. But when I think about how much more profitable we'll be, because our cost of that power will probably be 15 to 20% lower than what we otherwise thought it was going to be when we started our business model.
Right.
So that's ultimately, I think, you asked about China and coal, and their power footprint is what's creating a lot more of these the synthetic.
It's interesting because, like in, I guess in 2008, we had a conference when the market crashed, and we had Marcy Kaptur and Patriarch Partners and the head of, industrial claims for the United States government. And they all said, China is underselling, they're dumping because they're underselling U.S. products by 20% pricing, claiming that it's labor. But labor at that point in time was less than 15% of all product manufacturing. Today it's less than 7 or 8% because of robotics and advanced technology, et cetera. So to say that there's a margin of 20%, really it's just dumping and government regulatory that stops, the U.S. from having, a
robust supply chain.
Exactly.
Supply chain.
Right.
No, that's exactly, and that's what's been happening. If we had this conversation 3 years ago, we've been talking a lot about electric vehicles, not energy storage or batteries necessarily. And I would have told you that the price fully landed in the United States was about $14 a kilogram.
Sure.
Today it's for synthetic graphite, for battery graphite. Today it's like $7.50.
How big is the market for this synthetic graphite that you're talking about?
So today, even with the relatively modest adoption rate of electric vehicles today, I think it's high single digits, give or take. We're talking about 300,000 tons of installed demand in America, which is equivalent to about $3 to $3.5 billion.
Wow!
All of that today is coming from outside.
And what's the demand outside of Europe or?
So Europe obviously has a higher adoption rate on EVs in particular. So it's probably about 40% higher in Europe. But China's the one that, of course, dominates because its own domestic market. I don't know if they've hit 50% adoption rate on EVs yet, but they're not. They're getting darn close. So the bulk of their production stays in China. Right. However, they've overbuilt.
Again, dumping,
as they tend to do, and so they have plenty of capacities to absorb multiples the size of America and Europe, which of course is why we're seeing the price reduction. Basically an attempt to basically keep us out of business. So we've actually gone down the very I guess unfortunate path of actually filing an anti-dumping and countervailing claim against the Chinese. The industry has, not just us.
Good. So Anovion is kind of positioning itself as a leader in this North American battery materials manufacturing. What do you see as the biggest opportunity and challenge for scaling up in this sector, right? Especially given the reliance on this energy-intensive processes like synthetic graphite production.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest risk by far and away is capital. I mean, it's a capital risk story. We kind of have, I guess, 2 different valleys of death, if you want to use some terminology that I think Silicon Valley likes to use, because we have the development stage of the technology, which of course you have to just fund, your runway against. But then we have the second kind of valley of debt, which isn't even a valley, it's more like a canyon, because you have this big time period of some it'll take as little as maybe 12 to 18 months in some industries, some sub industries, and in our case, again, about 2 years to get in business, and some will take longer, which means you have to absorb all that fixed cost absorption over the course of time, and before you're really getting real cash flow. And so that's by far the biggest risk here. A lot of people think that China can ultimately still beat us, but I would actually argue that even if the tariffs go away in 5 years, we think, again, given our cost structure and given the fact that a lot of the supply chain today is to our advantage, in our power story in America is an advantage that we can actually compete long term with China.
And there's no competitors in your space in the domestically right now?
Today, I mean, there's 5 of us kind of collectively entering the market. We're the only Americans doing that. And we have a number of others that are trying to come in the market.
The domestic,
and
competitors.
So you kind of think there's the 5 of us domestically, and then obviously there's Chinese capacity worldwide.
Right. So you emphasized Anovion's goal to become carbon neutral over time. How do you balance that need versus sustainability or innovation or just this pressure of scaling?
Yeah, so I alluded to this in I think one of the previous responses, but I guess the unfortunate reality is that it's really the next generation of EVs and really consumers that are probably going to benefit or really start demanding, I think, that the environmental profile of cars and things like that are more environmentally friendly, and that's fine. So we actually are positioning ourselves to have a super environmental footprint. We have a path to where, again, with our power footprint and our production process, again, we'd be upwards of 80% reduced versus the Chinese incumbents anyway.
Wow. Okay.
But then on top of that, we're developing technology that can take us to CO2 neutral or possibly negative. And just to give you a sense of just one little stat, it takes like 7 years before the electric vehicle is better for the environment, at least a CO2 footprint versus the gas.
Wow.
7 years on the road. And so
does that include the pollution from production as well?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so if you just swap in our graphite for the Chinese graphite with our graphite, you did nothing else to the car.
Okay.
It takes about 5 to 5.25 years, which means, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but taking off a year and a half to 2 years with just one of the materials. Can you imagine if all of the battery materials started looking at their production?
So
process?
you're manufactured primarily with natural gas, or
no? It's actually electricity. But again, this goes back to the power footprint of where we're focusing our sites. It's around areas of the country that have nuclear coming in.
Georgia just rolled out a huge nuclear power plant.
One coming in, I think, 6 months ago. They have another one coming online maybe about 18 months from now.
So be honest, was that a strategic decision that you made in advance of the plant opening, or was that just your damn luck?
Oh no, absolutely. The site itself. We really focus our site selection around areas that we're going to have not necessarily the nuclear that you're alluding to, but where the power footprint from the local utility that we're getting the power from, or nearby solar projects, or it might be, would have a very strong, clean footprint. And again, not necessarily because it was clean; it's because it was cheap.
Wow. Well, Chip, listen, we're going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to move on a 15-minute lightning round, but let's take a break for right now, and then we'll get right back to it.
Thank you, Marty.
All right, so we're back for our lightning round. So we're going to talk about, go through several questions and have answers in 90 seconds or less. So let's talk about trade tariffs, something topical today. Do tariffs on battery materials help or hurt U.S. manufacturing?
Massively help. Because when you start an industry from zero, which in many cases is what the battery materials are for this country, although we have a lot of raw materials, we don't have the production capability. So tariffs are actually being used I believe, the right way, which is to help get manufacturing in America built up so that over the long term we can compete with China.
Fantastic. China's dominance. China controls most of the graphite market. Can the U.S. catch up in 5 years?
Yeah, we definitely can. It'll take us about 5 to 7 years to have our full footprint unleashed. But given our cost advantage that we see, so long as we can keep the costs, our cost structure in check, and of course not have pricing get manipulated, we can compete with the Chinese for the long term.
Well, great. So we're I'm sort of old school, and we always talk about how car manufacturers have a multiplier effect. Do jobs that are created by companies like yours, do they have a multiplier effect? I mean, it seems like you're created like 400 jobs in Atlanta, in Georgia. What's the ripple effect on local economies?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously we don't have great data other than other analogs as far as our type of business that we are, which might be aluminum smelter, for example, would be a reasonably similar analog. But really, so we think that about we're going to create about 400 or 500 jobs over the course of hopefully the next 24 to 36 months down in southwestern Georgia, where we're going down in the counties of very far southwest of Georgia. They actually have a net outflow of families of workers out of the county every day.
Wow.
And they come back home that night. So we believe that we actually can create substantial value into the community. We're getting about $185 million of incentives from the state of Georgia. So that might be the best sort of proxy for what we believe the economic impact could be. I think it could be multiples more. When you think about things like home building and hotels that might be required,
there you go,
just to satisfy us.
Sure. So your new company, more competition, or do you think electric battery costs are going to drop within the next 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years, I'd say pretty confidently they won't. But I'd say 2035, 10 years, I think we can actually have the supply chain at a scale across not just graphite, but across the entire battery material supply chain and battery manufacturing at a scale that can bring those costs down.
So you think the battery ecosystem is going to all along the price will come down? Interesting. So is synthetic graphite the answer to securing a stable supply chain, or do we need natural graphite?
Yeah, I mean, so most customers, OEMs, will use a blend today of natural and synthetic for the anode of the battery, the lithium-ion battery, the primary technology today. Although there are natural reserves in Canada and America, it'll take a long time to really access that natural graphite anyway. But we're plentiful of the feedstock in America to make synthetic graphite. But because most chemistries use a blend of the two, we don't really think the natural necessarily is a competitor as much as a collaborator.
Yep.
And today it's probably give or take 55 or 60% synthetic in most chemistries. And tomorrow, if you look at a lot of the projected use of the chemistries being developed in America, probably more like 75% or more will be synthetic over the course of a long time.
Wow. So the world's changing. So we had talked earlier about energy and nuclear in Georgia. So energy cost, how big a factor is it when you decide where to build the plants?
It's massive. It's one of the top reasons of rationale for actually where we would locate, akin to how close are we to our feedstock, which is basically Texas and Louisiana, how close are we to the customers, which is basically the eastern half of the United States. And so when I think about energy, it's a number that I think I mentioned, it's our number 2 cog. So it's really important to ensure that we're profitable and can serve our customers.
So do you see EV adoption continuing to surge, or what do you see are the biggest barriers to that right now?
Yeah, we actually, it's funny, we try to not de-emphasize, but we don't try to focus too much on the electric vehicle market, because of course that's more of a consumer-driven demand. And of course we want GM and Ford and Tesla and all those guys to be super successful. But when I think about what we're really doing to help America, it's as much about the other part of the use case of batteries, and that's the energy storage systems, the military applications, etc.
Wow.
So we do believe, of course, that the electric vehicle market will continue to grow from call it 8 or 9 or 10% today to tomorrow being 20%, whatever that means, or maybe even higher at some point. But we're really focused on the long-term adoption across multiple markets, not just electric vehicles.
Where do you think you have competitive advantage versus your competitors What's Anovion's edge?
Yeah, so it starts really with the technology. The technology was actually invented in Niagara Falls initially, which happens to be where our R&D center is.
Okay,
It's
got it.
just coincidental. But nonetheless, so we think that our key competency is really around furnace technology or thermal technology, and being the best that in the hopefully in the world. But then it also comes down. We think we can be the low cost provider.
Okay.
And even versus the Chinese, once we're at scale, and so we think that's gonna be a massive advantage. And then the real moat to the business, and not just for us, but for everyone in the landscape, is that we're all focused on safety, right? Battery. We hear stories all the time about Tesla blowing up or whatever it might be. And so safety is a huge consideration for electric vehicles, for energy storage, etc. And so for us, we're really focused on making sure that we can create a product that could be more aligned with those initiatives.
Sure. With respect to climate, do you think you can hit carbon neutrality without sacrificing profitability?
Yeah. 100. Well, I should say 100%. We know we get the 80% reduce of our CO2 footprint versus the Chinese incumbents. We think the next 20% is very, very doable at a relatively modest capital cost. And because of what I was saying before about our production process, we can actually improve our cycle time by 25% if we get this development correct. And by doing that, we can also potentially save on upwards of 25% of our power costs, which means they'll also be more profitable.
Got it.
Maybe more importantly, much higher ROICs.
Great. Just in closing, next big thing, what's the next breakthrough in battery technology we should all be watching for?
There's a lot of folks chasing a lot of different things. You see the Japanese really focusing on solid state. There's been some progress on solid state batteries. You get the occasional article about maybe sodium ion batteries or potassium ion batteries, and those are all interesting technologies that we think can complement as well. But at the end of the day, I think about the $1 trillion+ are being poured into building lithium-ion battery technology or gigafactories in America.
Yep.
And I just don't see it's a pretty massive switching cost for the automotive OEMs, and then at some point the guys making the energy storage systems as well. It'll be pretty big switching costs to really have anything massively disrupt on the underlying technology over the next 10 or 15 years or longer. Doesn't mean it's not gonna have a lot of people try. I think there are some really interesting things of making lithium-ion batteries, more powerful and safer. That I think you'll see a lot of that kind of improvement.
Fantastic. Well, great, Chip. Thanks so much for making it to Resililent Alpha. We loved having you, and hopefully we'll have you back again.
Marty, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Cheers.
Thanks.